NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, actually, today we're going to turn the focus inwards because there's been a lot of heat and focus on the nature of the studio debates in television studios. This is, of course, after Rajiv, the Congress spokesperson, Rajiv Tyagi's unfortunate demise, soon after he finished one show on TV. Is it the acrimonious nature of the show that raised his blood pressure that caused the heart attack? Well, the jury is out on that, but whatever it is, there has been a lot of speculation, a lot of conversation around the chatter and the kind of debates that are taking place. After all, when you have debates that are called Dangals, Mahabharat, Kurukshetra, that itself lets you know as to what exactly is going on in the studio. But are the studios to be blamed? Because there is also a reflection of the high decibel, aggressive conversation that is taking place outside the TV studios. And also, I would also like to discuss the nature of spokespersons, the kind of people that are being sent. They are encouraged to joust, to fight, rather than to make logical points and have a conversation. So joining me, I have people who are familiar with the television studios, journalists, political analysts who've actually had experience of both the worlds. Joining me is Veer Sanghvi. He's a former editor, television anchor. He's a commentator and a political analyst. R. Jaganathan, he is the editorial director of the Swarajya and also a familiar face on our TV channels. Kaveri Bomzai, political commentator, author and analyst. Savan Naqvi, also author and a political commentator and also an analyst. And everybody here has seen the inside of TV studios. So Veer, I'd like to begin with you. You've seen it during the UPA year, you've seen it now. So has the conversation become worse or was it always as bad? When did studios become akhadas?
I think the whole pattern of television has changed, Priya. When we started doing news television in India, because we didn't have a domestic model, we patterned ourselves on, say, the BBC or perhaps the CNN of that era, which meant that they were like newspapers. Editors sent people out to go and cover stories. It was reporting. When you had guests in the studio in the evening, usually the guests were there, as they are on, say, the BBC, to try and explain stuff to you, to try and provide some analysis, some depth. That model was junked sometime during UPA 2, and we've shifted to another model. It's a model that works for television channels because it's largely cost-free. In the old days, you needed a few OP vans. Now you don't even need that. You just need a very hard-working desk that the anchors, various anchors, sit behind. And instead of doing any reporting, instead of finding out what's really happening, you move away from facts and you go into the realm of opinion. And every evening, you no longer refer to it. I mean, people forget this, but the term debate is relatively recent. It used to be called a disco in television terminology, a discussion in the old days. Now it's called a debate because the idea is not just to deal in opinion, but to pit people with one kind of strong opinion versus people who have another strong kind of opinion. And if there isn't enough strong opinion, the anchor jumps in with his or her strong opinions. So what you really have is not the BBC or the CNN model. What you have is the World Wrestling Entertainment model, in which there are good guys and bad guys. The referee is also biased. He's on one side. And essentially, a good time is had by all, including the viewers, and nobody leaves the show any wiser than they were when they began watching it.
I mean, your take on this, we use the word strong opinions 3 times, all sides. Everybody has to have a strong opinion at the end of the day. So where is the room for flexibility for conversation at all? And is it also a reflection of the times where everything is hyped up to aggression and strong opinions?
Priya, I think just taking off from what Veer said, it's also a reflection of the times we're living in, but also of the government we have. We have a government that's completely driven by hashtags and social media hashtags. And they set the agenda every morning and they decide what's trending. And news anchors very dedicatedly and very devotedly pick up cues from there and make those the discussion points. So I think that's one, the fact that we are driven by hashtag journalism, which in any case comes from the social media platform, which is a heightened version of a polarized society in any case. The second thing I think I want to make the point is that this is also not the first time that something like this has happened. If you all recall Om Puri and his terrible last debate with, an anchor of, a leading channel, where he was almost reduced to tears because he had the temerity to call out the BSF soldier and to suggest that there was something that, a soldier's duty was to actually fight for the nation. So it was no big deal if he had died. And he was accused of being anti-national, of being unpatriotic, and it actually, in a way, led to his demise as well. So this is really not the first time that we are visiting this kind of scenario where, a television debate has actually, in a way, caused something like this. And I think the last point I want to make at the very beginning is that news channels are actually now competing with GEC channels. They're competing with general entertainment channels. If you look at especially during COVID, if you look at the rise in the viewership of Hindi entertainment channels, it has been actually much higher than GEC channels, the percentage rise, because there was no fresh content as well from GEC channels. So in a way, the Khara style of journalism where people are, shouting at each other has replaced the Ekta Kapoor style of GEC entertainment, where shouting at each other was followed by 3 tight slaps to, whoever was the antagonist. And, the camera would pan wildly thrice and, then it would end on that cliffhanger. So I think the fact that GEC channels are being, given very tough competition by news channels is another factor that should not be forgotten. And don't forget that in this whole thing, the English news channels are a really tiny percentage. So they will take any opportunity they can to get there. So if you have an anchor screaming from morning to night, it's only really virtually him calling out for viewers in a way and saying, watch me, hear me. I mean, can you imagine somebody singing Ram bhajans while the, Bhumi Pujan was going on in Ayodhya with a party anchor, with a party spokesperson? Is it actually in the realm of possibility? But it's happened. So we're living in very strange entertainment-driven times where everything is about TRPs and everything is about entertainment.
I remember Anchor wearing a suit also, a space suit when there was a space landing.
And but of course, we've seen simulated wars so many times in the newsroom, short of anchors actually going to fight and going on surgical strikes. We've seen everything in the studio.
But, even a show like Roundtable, which all of you have appeared on, where the conversation is at this level, there is no shouting. I had an instance of people actually coming to blows. Kaveri speaks of slaps being exchanged. There was a situation where Tariq Fateh and Manish Tiwari nearly exchanged blows, and Dr. Swami's security had to kind of, make them sit. So that has also happened. But Mr. Jagannathan, Kaveri said, and someone said, it's basically also with this government or this during, the last 7 years, there has been a more increase in the aggression, which is reflected in our studios.
Actually, I trace the change back to somewhere around 2010-11 when Kejriwal was rising, when actually issues went to the street. And if you remember, I think Kejriwal was making wild allegations almost against every single businessman in the country, right? There's no proof, but you could keep saying that, that, oh, he chor hai, wo chor hai, that kind of stuff started, right? So that was actually the genesis of this whole studio becoming a, street jatra or some kind of entertainment or, abandonment of all kind of restraint in terms of what you say or don't say. That was the beginning. Okay, it continued. Sorry. So that was the basic thing. That's where it all started. I think I would make 3 broad points. One, once the television and mainstream news media business model started cracking and it became less and less profitable, I think they shifted from the news mode where you go out and investigate stories to bringing a few talking heads to the studio. That is stage 1, because after all you can get. Once you brought people into the studio, it was a boring thing, right? There is no way you can get the audience to sort of wake up once in a while unless you made it more about entertainment. So they took a cue from Bollywood, made black and white characters out of everybody and things. Today, the anchor no longer asks open-ended question. He asks, have you stopped beating your wife? That's the kind of questions they ask, so that whatever answer you give is a wrong one. And that's the way it is going on. Okay, so once it has become from a discussion or a conversation or even a debate, it has become a slanging match. And that is the tutu meme is the central theme of all TV things. So once the business model crashed, once you move to the studio, and now even when you move away from the studio, the only way to keep the audience is to make it more like entertainment and having people fight right there. Just like in a street, if you find two people fighting, there's a huge crowd that collects. Now, TV studio has become something like that. So this is the tragedy. And the worst thing that has happened in media, the mainstream media, is that they are taking the cues from social media. Social media is media, but it has its own norms. Okay, there no kind of decency needs to be observed. One is because you're partly invisible, you can put any name and start abusing anybody. So there is no question of debate. So social media has been important for a very simple reason that it has been cathartic in terms of getting people out of their political correctness mode, but it's also giving the cue to mainstream. That's why when you say hashtag journalism, what is happening? You can't take your day's topics from what's happening on social media. Okay. Social media changes its mood every 15 minutes. So there is no need for the end of the day primetime television to follow social media. But that's what they're doing, which means that they already lost the game. So the main media is actually social media. Mainstream has become side stream.
Sava, you've done also a lot of debates, and you've seen what he's saying. Do we see also studios giving legitimacy to the trolls on social media? We are actually calling them as panelists, as political analysts. Also, none of them are journalists, none of them are politicians, but they just have a voice and they can be acrimonious and they have langpa, so they are there in our studios.
So, couple of quick points. I think Fox News has more viewership in the US than many of the high-profile shows. Let's understand that, okay? Number two, the format, my entire TV career began with being approached by Times Now when the most famous person on TV was there, and we signed for a contract by them for an election. And there is no doubt, let me say this here, that for many years I used to pass through airports and people used to look at me and look blankly and say, take his name, as if they were not sure who I am, but I'm the person who spoke to that gentleman. That is how my recognition value came in, right? People started, after years of writing, years and years, after a while, of course, it's like people got to know my name also, but the point is, that is a level of fame that individual who reshaped, who created this, he enjoyed. He did that. Now, what is the format? So for years I did that channel and I gained a lot from it. I gained, once you get recognition value, you'll get more money for your book contracts. For instance, in a normal world, not when the economy is crashed. Once you get all that, you just have a greater value. You can be the greatest writer in the world. You can be fantastic, but it has certainly helped me once I decided to leave the last job that I held. Television, so I'm not going to run it down altogether. For me personally, it was great. However, now what it has become now, it is a mob. Okay, so the mob, they're set up with a mob, and there is a mob leader, and they get a few people who they want to attack, right? So at some point, and so naturally the mob will outnumber the small group which is called there ostensibly to have a discussion, but it's literally become like a mob format. Who will you verbally lynch? Who will you abuse?
Not just a mob, it's a fixed fight. It's not even a fight, it's a fixed fight. Sabha, you said they already have someone they want to attack.
It's not a fight. First, you've got to understand that. It's a rigged game. They want to it's not even an equal fight. It's like a rigged game, which is why I stopped doing that particular channel. I mean, one day I just removed my headphones because I'm not somebody who's going to have a heart attack and expire after a show, right? I removed my headphones in the middle of the introduction when he started off. And it's not that I was personally ever, and I said, this has become too damn boring. And I just got up and I walked off. because the same thing started off and all that. However, I mean, we're trying to understand the format of television. Okay, so now it's a fixed thing. The anchor's thing, he gets his few thugs who are not journalists, who will say sexist things, they'll say communal things, they'll say atrocious things. So the thug will say this, so you have legitimized saying anything about anyone at any point, and then they will leave the show and they will then go online and say the same things about that person who may have sat there and said, I think you're wrong, I don't believe you have any facts on your side. They will call you, my last experience in times after which I didn't go for 2 months, was a gentleman who called me a kitty party gang, who I didn't even know all this, who called me manicured nails. Now I can take on a political argument. Now that is sexual profiling, gender profiling. But this person was so thrilled with himself, he then went on social media. I was not even aware all of this had been said because the decibel level was so high, and I can actually take a political argument. But this becomes like, so you have gender. The anchor should have stopped that person. That person, in my view, should be persona non grata. You do not take a senior woman journalist and try to trivialize her on the basis of that she's a kitty party gang, that she has manicured nails. I mean, that kind of crap is said, and this person is passed off as a resident intellectual.
So these, but these moves, what Sabha is talking about, we are people who are not part of the system, but we also have people who are part of the system, spokesmen who have now become, what happened with usually in the evening TV studios, they are these supporters and political analysts, but they're also spokesmen who don't talk, they shout, they yell, and they're sent by the media cells to do just that.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that Jaggi said, and I agreed with absolutely everything he said, which is that the beginning of this deterioration was during the alleged India against corruption movement, the sort of so-called Anna Hazare movement, which had damn all to do with Anna Hazare. That was a movement created almost entirely by television. The crowds were only in Delhi, which was nice because the TV studios were also in Delhi. People who nobody had heard of, people like Prashant Bhushan, who were like, say, lawyers maybe, were called on to studios, treated with respect. Laws that they had drafted, we were told, had to be implemented immediately. Arvind Kejriwal became a national figure. And anybody who opposed those people was immediately portrayed, and that in those days the UPA was in power, was portrayed as an enemy of the people. That, I think, Jaggi is right, set the tone for what was to follow. You just see what's happening on Ram Leela ground and you do your own Ram Leela in the studio. Once that happened, the spokespeople who went on these programs were also caught in a quandary because very often they were being used as targets. One way of looking at how all this is done is to see how Pakistani generals are treated on some channels. Night after night, when there's India-Pakistan tension, a couple of Pakistani generals will appear on a link. All that will happen is that the anchor will abuse them, the one or two guys from the BJP will abuse them, the resident defense expert will abuse them, the odd general will look like he's going to have a heart attack and will shout at them. But these guys come back week after week, night after night. I always wondered why they did it. And the answer is that they were paid and they were happy to do it. I now feel that on many of these channels, liberals have become the Pakistani generals. They turn up night after night on channels where they will be abused. They will not be given a chance to say anything. Yet they do it presumably because they like the exposure, they like the fame, or maybe they like the money. So what do you do if you're a political party and you have to cope with this kind of channel? The BJP's had a good policy, which is someone like Sambit Patra, who's a master of television, goes on not necessarily to make an argument, but to intimidate, to worry people on the other side. And when that doesn't work, he immediately wrecks the whole debate. It descends into chaos, and any criticism of the government is immediately forestalled. Even the Congress now, you see Shah Mohammed, you see many of the spokespeople. The instruction there is try and create chaos. Put your views across as aggressively as possible. If necessary, call people names. But if the debate is not going your way, sabotage. Now, none of this has anything to do with reasoned opinion. None of this has anything to do with party policy. It's become a game. We've all used the wrestling match analogy. It's a wrestling match. when your team is not doing very well, you start fouling and hope to get disqualified and for the match to end.
Yeah.
Kaveri, you want to come in on this? The fact that, it's also institutionalized, this whole wrestling.
Yeah, and I think, another point I want to make here is that, we have something like 400 news channels. So each television channel really is looking for a unique identity. I mean, the news is the news, how different can it be? So I think the fact that each television channel is using a particular persona to be a differentiator. And I think it started in the time when they decided that they would not show news as much as do blitzkrieg coverage of a particular story. So everyone has, of course, talked about the Anna Hazare movement. I remember those were that story was covered sometimes for 72 hours at a non-stop. And, that would be a great badge of honor for the channel, saying that, we were with this story for 72 hours non-stop, as if there was nothing else happening in India. So I think this blitzkrieg journalism, in a way, has been a way to enter this kind of Saas Bahu journalism, where really all that you have is people calling each other names, because there is no news, there are no news headlines. News headlines are quickly dispatched within, 100 minutes, 100 news, or, the real news is actually in the ticker. And every channel is trying to pursue its own idea of what the news that day is. It could be Sushant Singh Rajput, it could be, except for the Ram Janmabhoomi, of course, which everyone covered with equal devotion, or it could be something else. So, they decide what's their priority. And I think the second point is that, when you talk of people like Sambit Patra, really, what are they doing? They're filibustering. They're filibustering. It's a political tool, which is a legitimate political tool, where one person gets up and speaks non-stop as long as possible on a particular topic. But you cannot have two people filibustering in a television studio and passing it off as debate. So what is a legitimate political tool is actually being completely used for the absolutely wrong purpose, because I think every political party has decided that there is no parliament, there are no debates in parliament, there are hardly any. May as well use the television studio as a sort of mock parliament, and just tell your spokespeople to filibuster as long as possible. And, the poor viewer has to watch this in action.
Can I just come in on this, for the sake of accuracy? Except for the BJP, the opposition parties don't actually send anyone to the leading channels. And I think English channels, for all the small viewership, have a lot of disproportionate influence. They are the ones that the ministers watch and they call you up. Why did you say this? Why did that happen? They have that influence, okay? They don't have the advertising right now because everything's crashed. That's a different issue. But the top channels don't have the people from the other parties. There is no official Congress going there. There is no official Trinamool Congress going there. They have proxies. They hunt down people who they think are sympathetic. So, that's what they have. So it's not even as if the Congress is sending people to Republic or Times now. They are not sending their official spokesperson. But they have fill-ins for that. So let's clarify that. Number one, English channels still have a disproportionate influence. Thirdly, I'd like to say people also get the television. We get what we deserve. Because do we end up watching those meaningful reports like India Matters and all that? Everybody wants to do that. I've done journalism through this. I've written that stuff. I've covered the migration. I've gone and covered the state of people in lockdown in Northeast Delhi. I managed to do it all. But the point is, do people actually watch it on television? No, they don't. They don't watch the India Matters and all that. That's the truth. They either watch anchors, let's say an anchor, even a liberals, they'll watch the anchor driven. It's personality driven for years, or if there is some important breaking news, then of course, authentic news, nothing to match the real news when that happens. But otherwise, people are watching going in for the shows, they're going in for these punch-ups. That's
the journalists. We also get the journalists we deserve. Then the journalism that we subscribe to, Mr. Jagannath, is not just the politicians.
See, I think the nature of the medium is such that individual anchors do make a difference. Our regret is that the quality of the anchors has deteriorated, not that the anchor is unimportant. I don't know, why did people once watch Pranay Roy or Veer Sanghvi for that matter? Because I think you expected a certain amount of gravitas, class, whatever it is, right? So anchors are very important in this medium, and you cannot run away from that fact. So it is important. Only thing is the new kind of anchors. Second thing that has happened is sociologically, I find that in all over the place, especially in India, there is an attention deficit disorder among all viewers. Okay. So if you do not, they want to move on from this, acha bolo next thing, what next thing, we are a mobile phone generation. We quickly scroll, right? We only look at what. So in this generation, if you're going to hold somebody's interest on TV and you have to take one particular story, you have to give it maximum coverage today within that 1 hour, because tomorrow nobody is even going to talk about it, even though there is huge amount of stuff to be said on the same subject, right? So nobody wants the depth. People just want that concentrated blast, what Kaveri called Blitzkrieg. I think the point is, on that day when you want to watch it, you better give it, squeeze every last drop of emotion or anything from it. The ADD generation, for that, this TV is adjusting to their reality, that they have a very short attention span. And that's what they're trying to do to capture that. These two factors, I would say, are important.
Attention span, and also the fact that at the end of the day, it's as someone was saying, that we get what we deserve, because everybody's talking and shouting at the loud level. Nobody is wanting to listen anymore. I think everybody wants to just talk. So final word, we have to just sum up the debate. Are we going to live with this for longer? Do you see this ending, or do you think that it's just going to get worse?
I think, Priya, the nature of news television in India has changed, and Kaveri made that point. It's become like general entertainment television. And Sabha said that English has a disproportionate importance, which it probably does. But I think we often don't look enough at regional channels, at Hindi channels, which are, in the terms we're discussing, much more vociferous and perhaps more violent, verbally violent certainly, than the English channels. Those are the ones with the real viewership. If you look at the viewership of English news channels normally, it is 0.1 to 0.2% of the total television universe. It's the Hindi channels that have the real viewers. So one reason why we get blinded by numbers is that many of the channels people have been discussing, which I will not name, get a disproportionate share of people who normally watch Hindi programming. I don't know how many of you have noticed this, but many of the channels that have been mentioned here, the anchors are speaking more and more Hindi. They're getting guests who only speak Hindi. The reason they get these numbers is not because the traditional English language viewer has changed. It's because English language television, ever since it became a Ram Leela, has managed to attract viewers who are not traditional viewers. These are viewers who come from another universe, the Hindi universe. And that is what makes them seem much more popular than normal channels. If you were to do research, and unfortunately there hasn't been done research, on the core English language viewer and how much he's changed his habits, he hasn't actually changed his habits that much. It's just that the Hindi channels have such big numbers, attract a little bit of them, and your numbers shoot up. But even then, if you look at the numbers of the Hindi channels, which are really general entertainment channels, they pale in comparison to general entertainment channels. I often argue that many of them should not be seen as news channels at all. You should put them next to Colors or Star Plus or whatever. And then their viewership figures are not that impressive. So I think sometimes we are overly obsessed with English news channels. They're really not that important. All the things that they now focus on, Sushant Singh Rajput, etc., which is clearly the most important issue facing India today, came from the Hindi channels. It wasn't really a creation of the English news channels. So I think sometimes, because we're English speakers and we're now on an English language channel, we err by looking at the English universe in isolation.
And I think just one point, I think it's interesting because the advertising, if you notice on these English channels, the really vociferous ones, has also changed. And look at the brands that are advertising there. You will find that they're pretty much similar to the brands in BEC channels and in Hindi news channels. So that gives you a sense of the viewership. So I think that's quite interesting.
Okay, and also, just one last word on the nature, quality of the spokesmen also. I remember early on, they were seasoned leaders. They were all who became INB ministers, joined the cabinet. This was their training ground, really, the grooming ground, not the political field, but the TV studio. But today we have people who are just auditioning to, I think, be part of the Khada or the entertainment channel, and they are actually picked up by a spokesman. Some are even given Rajya Sabha seats. So that itself is also a very sad commentary on the way the TV studio debates.
Priya, everywhere the fringe is becoming the mainstream. That's the unfortunate thing.
But Priya, about the BJP, Sambit, who, by the way, I just called me up on a particular article and we had these hilarious conversations on the phone. Anyway, but the point is, if you take Nalin Kohli, if you take Sudhanshu, they're not so. It's Sambit has created this impression that all BJP spokespersons are like this.
No, they're not. And even the Congress has its, the rowdy element. So it's divided. But yeah.
It's very sober. Sudhanshu is also, he gets into his Mahabharat and Ramayana.
Yeah. Sudhanshu is very
civilized in his interaction. So I think these are the three top guys. It's just Sambit is in singing bhajans, abusing people, calling, that's his thing. So he's different. Yeah, Well,
we've had a very reasonable Samvit also on Roundtable. So I think Samvit adapts himself to the studio he's in also. But that's it for now. We're totally out of time before we think. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming here, taking part in this. And also thank you all for watching this show.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.